Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and let's call this meeting to order. Since this is our first meeting in 2019, it's so wonderful to see you all, and Happy New Year to everybody. So let's start with introduction.
I'm Tom Hall with District 5 Planning.
Tanya Higdon with KYTC Central Office.
Thomas Witt, KYTC Central Office.
Michelle King, Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control District.
Arthur Jones, City Engineer in Shepherdsville, Kentucky.
Ricky Bowler with Trout.
Keith Griffey, CFO, Bullitt County.
Felicia Harper, Planning and Zoning, Bullitt County.
Larry Summers, City Engineer for New Albany.
Brian Dixon, Clark County.
Nick Langford,
Matt and Jay Jefferson County. Jim Irvin, Oldham County.
Jim Sullivan, Oldham County Engineer.
Larry Cheney, Kipta.
Ida Kopik, Tark.
Ashley Tenius, Kipta. Amanda Dufford with Kipta.
Nick Bell, Kipta.
David Burton.
Elizabeth Parker, Kipta.
Andy Rush, Kipta.
Adam Forsyth, Kipton.
Sarah Berry, Kipta.
Keenan Stratton, City St. Matthews. Jared Haley, Kipta.
Tom Pasiga, JDG. Keith Dameron, American Engineer.
Heidi Yoler, KYTC.
John Callahan with AECom.
Betty Lennon, AECom.
Mike King, Louisville Metro. Scott Fleming, Shepherdsville.
Bob Stein, United Consulting. Bert Stocker, Fisherville Area Neighborhood Association.
Amanda Spencer, KYTC Planning.
Craig Butler, Metro Air Pollution Control.
Bradley Coombs, Air Pollution Control District.
We have few more coming in.
I'm standing in for Tom Dirk today.
Okay.
Public Works. You're much prettier. You're much prettier today.
Who I'm standing in for.
Well, thank you all. Next on the agenda is October 10th, TTCC meeting minutes. I hope all of you, or at least majority of you, had an opportunity to review the minutes. Do we have a motion or any questions or comments? Motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yes, I missed both of those. Who made the motion? Jim, and second. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. Transportation Policy Committee report. Larry Cheney will provide staff report on the November TBC meeting.
Yes, ma'am. At the annual meeting, which a lot of you were in attendance, we heard an annual report from Mr. Barry Barker, who has since retired from TARC. We'll miss him in our committee work. He gave a look at 2018 and where we were going in 2019 with the new executive director. We also did the same thing with the MPO, looked at the year in review. We had federal certification review back in August. We had the report available, the draft report available in November. We've presented the preliminary findings at that annual meeting. Today we're going to go a little bit more into depth of that report and share that with you. We talked briefly about the Census Participant Statistical Area Program, which we will be bringing back to you again next month to have a little more discussion on that, as well as we have the ability to work with the census in describing some of the geographies that we need for our modeling and for things that you might need. We also awarded the 2018 KITE Award, Kentucky Indiana Transportation Excellence Award. It went to the Fairdale Roundabout, which was a joint effort between Louisville Metro and KYTC. Some of the runners-up were the Riverport Circulator Project from TARC, the I-64 and I-265 Interchange Improvement Project, and the Dixie Highway Reconstruction Project, which is, again, a joint venture between Louisville Metro, TARC, and KYTC. That concludes the report.
Thank you very much. Public comment period. This is opportunity for anyone attending from the public to provide any comments and address the committee. Well, it looks like we do not have speakers today. Moving to the next. Federal certification review. IPTA staff will present findings and recent planning process after review of the Federal Highway Administration, FTA, and EPA. David?
Thank you.
Thank you.
A copy of the document, the federal certification review document, was made available through your packet. I have 10 copies. I'm in an auction off. The highest bidder. Any takers? I do have 10 copies. If anybody would like to take a look at a copy of this, please just let me know and we'll get you one right now.
It's also on our website.
There we go. Okay. So we do have the copies if you would like them. Basically, we are going to report on the federal certification review that took place in August of 2018. And we're going to go over the final report. So let me go over a couple of basics first that have to do with what is a certification review and why do we do it. As you already know, KIPTA is the NPO for the 5 counties of Clark, Floyd, Bullitt, Baldwin, and Jefferson, and also includes parts of Harrison and Shelby counties. And the KIPTA is the agency responsible for conducting or implementing federal transportation legislation and good planning practice. So those are our 2 primary roles. So we enact the federal law, the FAST Act, as it is referred to now. The certification review is basically the examination of that process, and they want to make sure that we are adhering to good federal the federal regs. There are 2 possible outcomes from the FCR or the federal certification review. We can either be certified or decertified. One or the other. If we are certified, then we keep on doing what we're doing. If we're not certified, then we have to go back and take a hard look at things and see what we need to fix. It's basically it's like when you were in school. They kind of say, "Yep, you did well, you passed," or "Nope, you didn't, and you failed, and we need to find out why." But the last one is also pretty important: the exchange of ideas, because the people who are with us during this process, they bring ideas to the table that we try to incorporate in our planning process as we go forward. Okay, how often do we do this? Every 4 years. So this is 2018. The next one will be in 2022. Who does it? Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and the EPA. They all come here and we all sit in this room and we chat. And we look to make sure we are doing the right things when it comes to the FAST Act and transportation. Who is the reviewer? Well, we know who is doing the looking, but who are they looking at? And they're looking at you. They're looking at our staff. They're looking at the TPC. They're looking at the cabinet, at NDOT, at TARC, because we work together to try to make sure that we meet what is asked of us through the FAST Act plus more. Now, KIPTA staff, we actually make the planning process happen, but we do it with you. So, what the feds are looking at is the overall planning process, which includes the staff, which includes the TTCC, the TPC, the board, everybody. The good news is that Mayor Deere, who's the chair, got a letter on November 13th that says, "Okay, you passed. You have been certified. You do meet what is asked of us through the FAST Act." Now, I want to make sure everyone understands that this is a Federal Highway, Federal Transit, and EPA meeting. This is not a KIPTA meeting. This is their agenda. They identify the topics, and we participate in making sure that they have everything that they need in order to complete their process. There are 2 basic components. There's the desk audit, which means that we basically send them material in advance. They get to look through that, and they spent, 4 weeks looking at stuff this last time? Then there's the site visit, when they come here and they visit with us, and they did that on August 22nd and August 23rd. And there are 3 basic components. They wanted to go on a tour of the area. So Larry with his great wisdom, defined a tour that we took on the morning of the 22nd. And then we sat in here for some Q&A, and we went over all of the regs. And then we also talked about the different things that we discovered through our exchange of ideas. Now, there's a lot of preparation that goes into making sure we have a good certification review process. And everyone in this room, this side of the room, your side, everybody was involved. From Jared on down to Tanya was here, Tom was here, Thomas was here, Michelle was here, several people were here to help us out. So we went through a lot of effort to try to make sure that the Federal Highway, Federal Transit, and the EPA knew that we know how to work together. And when we work together, we produce strong material. And that's the most important message that we wanted to get across to them is, yeah, we're doing a good job, but we're also doing a really good job. And so we want to make sure they know that. So we spent a lot of time getting things together so that when we sat down here in this room, they would be aware of it. I don't know if you were here, but these entire walls were full of maps and charts and displays. So when they walked in this room, they knew immediately that we were on top of it. So that worked out really well for us. There are three basic components. There are corrective actions. If we are not adhering to something in the regs, they let us know. There are recommendations. That's when they bring some of the ideas that they've garnished from other areas. They bring them to us and say, hey, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? Or, by the way, you may need to update something. So they try to help us make sure that we can do an even better job. And then commendations. These are when they say, look, you know what, you guys are doing best practice work. And we want to recognize that we are going to take the work that you do and share it with other NPOs and other areas throughout the country. So there's three areas that we try to, or that they focus on. So we're going to touch on those right now. How many corrective actions do we have in 2018? Larry?
None that I know of.
Now, point that out because 0 is the first time we've had 0. I've been doing this since 1996, and this is the first this is the first FCR where we have had 0 corrective actions. It's pretty important. It's not seen very often, so we're pretty proud of that. So we're not going to talk about any corrective actions because we didn't have any, so that's pretty good. Recommendations. They have 3 for us. They want us to include in the document itself, environmental mitigation procedures and how we try to deal with the environment. Now, if you were to have read the entire recommendation, you would have seen a little bit further down in the paragraph that they wrote, oh yeah, by the way, they've done a lot. They just didn't document it very well. So we have our online resource center with our red flags inventory. They like that a lot. We have a community assessment and outreach program that was written by Lori Kelsey. I don't know if you guys remember Lori or not. She retired 2 years ago. But Lori wrote that back in 2004 or 6, I forgot which it was. And it has not been updated because we've advanced our process beyond what was in that document and tried to make it more online and accessible to everyone. So the document that they're referring to has not been updated, but for a reason. So we tried to make that information that's available in the document, or make it available online. And the third recommendation was our air quality conformity MOA is 10 years old and needs to be updated. Yeah, they're right, it does. But we also need to recognize the fact that the air quality status, things in the air quality world are kind of crazy right now. So we're just kind of putting the brakes on. We're going to let things kind of settle down a little bit with the air quality, and then we are going to revisit the MOA for air quality. But we want to make sure that we don't have to do it twice or 3 times more in a very short period of time because the rules change. So we're going to let things settle, and then we're going to go after that. Those are the 3 recommendations that we got from the certification review. Not bad, if you ask me. Commendations. How many commendations did we get? Hey, Jared, how many commendations did we get?
We got 8.
And do you know why? Because we've never received 8 before. That's why we're making such a big deal. 8 commendations, 8 best practice examples that are going to be shared with other MPOs throughout the country. It's pretty good. I look back to the previous ones. I think the most we've ever received in the past was 4. So we doubled what we've done before. Let's look at these, shall we? The MPO went the extra mile for their performance management plan. As we've been talking to you about over the last couple of years, actually, we have put together a document that makes our performance plan very easily accessible to you and to others to have an understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve. They use the word exemplary. Well, I'm pointing that out. Now, that wasn't about the document. That was about a chart that Amanda put together that showed the relationship between national goals and our local performance measures and everything in between. So it's a very good accommodation for us.
And for all of you, a lot of you had direct participation in putting all that together.
The KIPTA Transportation Planning Portal, which I'm hoping you guys are very familiar with right now, because it's that online tool that we've been asking you to use for our project application process. And there's various layers of data that's available. Adam and his GIS team pulled together information that the rest of us, including you, contributed to, so that we were able to put together a really good portal that's now a commendation. So we feel pretty happy about that. TARC participates actively in the planning process with the commendation because of the Dixie Highway Project. Because our MPO has worked closely with TARC and with Metro and the state to try to bring together the pieces that are needed to introduce BRT to our region. That's a pretty good step, and the things that we have done along that path have been pretty good. I mean, John Callahan's here. Good timing, John. We got Tom and Tanya and Aida. I mean, everyone has participated in making sure that we can bring BRT to our region. Oh, wait, there's a second page. Let's go to the second page, sorry. Look at that. The online project application, again, the same, that direct tool that Elizabeth and Danielle Story and a couple others have been involved in making, and working with the GIS team and everyone else and making sure that we bring the pieces together that help us help you help us, quote by Larry. So we were able to bring together information, but the thing that they really were excited about was the red flag inventory that Sarah worked on and pulled together, again, with input from everybody on staff and other agencies like yours that we were talking with. The last thing is that with geocode public comment, that's Adam and his crew again, and Ashley. We were able to get public comment and we're able to mix it with data so that we can get a more well-rounded picture of the issues we're trying to deal with when we go forward with transportation. The Fed said, good job. Freight clusters. Most of you have been involved in our freight study that we've been working on. We did a really good job in trying to identify freight clusters and data that we were able to pull together so that we can understand better where the trips are going to and coming from when it comes to freight. Elizabeth has helped out a lot with that, kind of driven that effort. Adam has participated a great deal in trying to make a story out of that data. So we feel pretty good about that. KIPTA ranks in the top tier of MPOs in the EPA Southeast region that has a great command of the interagency consultation process. That's Andy and Nick and Randy. Of course, working together to make sure that we are meeting and crossing the T's or meeting what needs to be done and crossing the T's and dotting the I's, working with air quality to make sure we can have your projects moving forward. Another check mark. This is a long one. Project management process is basically what this is about. Back in August, August of 16, you guys helped us put together a project management process that we are now beginning to bear the fruit of the labor that you put into it. And so Nick and Amanda are driving that process home, and it's paying off, and the feds have realized that. So that's a good thing. Last one, Again, that portal. They keep going back to that portal. They like that online portal. But in this case, they like the bike and pet inventory that we made available to our sponsors. Not just the inventory, but the gaps. We went and took it the extra mile and said, hey, okay, so we know where the sidewalks are. Why don't we find out where the sidewalks aren't? So that when you are looking at your projects and we want to improve continuity for bike and ped facilities, where's the most effective way that we can do that? So Adam and his crew came up with the process to identify where those gaps exist. And it's pretty good. And hopefully you've been able to utilize it during the MTP update. So, 8 commendations that are a reflection of what we do and what you do and what the combined all of us do to make sure that we carry out our MPO process in a very effective manner. So when do we do this again? In 2022, late fall, summer, 4 more years from now. That's when it happens again. And what are we going to do now? Larry's going to lead us through the effort of looking at those 3 recommendations and making sure that we have addressed those issues that need to be addressed. And then you can see the full report here, just for a small fee. You can look at the report, or you can wait till it's on the website and download it there. Does anybody want a copy of the report? Seriously? No? Well, they're here if you want them after the meeting. That's it.
Thank you, David. We memorized it all, so nothing to worry about. Well, great overview, and thank you to the entire KIPTA team for leading us through this process. I mean, that happens every 3 years, and we could be proud of our support team and everything that has been accomplished since the last review. So thank you, everyone.
Ada, I concur with that, and I think they deserve a round of applause. I always thought that the staff is very professional, and Larry and David and everybody does a great job. So.
Exactly. Thanks.
We couldn't do it without you. Seriously. I mean, the things that we've been building on this, as many of you know who've been on this committee for 6, 7, 8 years, you know that we've been heading in this direction for a long time. And it feels really good to be where we are right now.
It does, and thanks. Good. We have quarterly project review. KIPTA team will present update from the latest review of projects using funding dedicated to MPO from Kentucky and Indiana. Action will be requested on this item. Nick?
Yes,
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Vale with KIPTA. I'm going to talk about the last quarterly project review process. Just for a little background, in the fall of 2016, TPC approved this new policy that you guys all drafted and helped formulate. Each quarter we go through this process. It involves sponsors submitting quarterly progress reports, kind of indicating whether that phase, each of the phases is on target, whether they might need a cost increase or a phase shift. There's opportunities for cost increases periodically, at least once per year. And there are some rules set around managing costs and schedules that I'll just briefly mention. I know you guys have heard this many times now. In terms of managing costs, project sponsors can request cost increases of greater than 20%. If they do, though, there's an exception required, exception letter that needs to be done prior to TPC. In terms of managing schedules, each phase of a project can be shifted or delayed 2 fiscal years, after which an exception to TPC is required. We haven't made it to that point yet, but 2019 would be the first time that any project phase would be requested for a third year shift. And then there is some flexibility within the, in Kentucky we have 2 dedicated programs that we have authority for, and in Indiana we have 4, but of those there is some flexibility to move up to 50% of the annual allocations between the 2 if there's a need. So let's get into Indiana and kind of a 2019 status of how things are looking. Across the top, you've got the 4 dedicated funding programs for which TPC has authority to award funds for: Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, Highway Safety Improvement Program, Surface Transportation, that should say Block Grant. They've changed that name through the FAST Act, and then Transportation Alternatives. So with the CMAQ program, we start with an annual allocation of about approximately $1 million. We've obligated about $200,000 this last quarter, so we have about $800,000 left. For HSIP, we have not had any obligations yet, but those I think are going to be coming pretty soon here in the next quarter. Surface transportation, almost all of that funding has been obligated, the majority of which is for the NDOT's heavy haul road. And then the Transportation Alternatives Program, we haven't obligated those funds yet. They're all tied up in one project that Clarksville and Jeffersonville have combined on a bike ped project that'll cross underneath the 65 interstate. We did have funds available for cost increases this quarter. You'll see in your packet that went out, there should be 4 attachments. One is the progress reports. Another is this recommendation sheet here from our project working group that came together in December, kind of at the last minute, because we realized we needed to get these 2020 funds programmed prior to the beginning of fiscal year 2020, which in Indiana starts in July. So they're about 3 months ahead of Kentucky and the feds. So all of these cost increases came in. Applications were received from all, I think it's 6 projects. And then based on the information we had at hand, we provided that to the project working group. They all submitted a prioritized ranking, 1 through 6. We aggregated those, and this is how it shook out. So the recommendation from the project working group is that Clarksville's Blackiston Mill Road Phase 1 project receive all of its requested STP dollars. New Albany State Street corridor improvements would receive 100% of its request, which is $28,000 for STP. Likewise, New Albany also had Market Street and Spring Street. That was a partial STP, partial TAP project that they're recommending award of $15,984. Charlestown Road Complete Streets Corridors for Floyd County was awarded the available TAP funds that we had this go around, and then Mount Tabor in New Albany received the remainder, $186,000, which was a portion of their request. That is the recommendation that the project working group makes, and so that is in turn what I'm asking for your recommendation for TPC approval at this time. So my action that's requested is to, to recommend TPC approve the 1-phase shift which came in, which was moving Montgomery Avenue, the 9th Street TAP project out a year. And my apologies, that should say fiscal year 2021 that is moving to. They recently informed us it needed to be moved back twice. So it's 1-phase shift and 5 cost increases that I'm asking you all to consider and recommend approval for.
Thank you, Nick. Do you have any questions or comments for Nick before we go to the motion or anything else? Any other information to share on the project? No? Or do we have a motion? Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thanks. Any discussion? All in favor? Against? Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to Kentucky, just a quick status update on where we are in fiscal year 2019. So again, I mentioned in Kentucky we have the authority, or the TPC has the authority to award funds for the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program and the Transportation Alternatives Program. So in terms of the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, we have $79 million programmed in projects, federal aid projects at the beginning of this fiscal year. We know the year just started, so we've only had about 400,000 in obligations. But based on progress reports, it looks like everyone's trending in the right direction. And the big goal here is to make sure we obligate at least $19 million, which is about what we receive every year in that program. That will ensure that we don't increase that unobligated balance. In the Transportation Alternatives Program, we have about $3 million available. None's been obligated yet, and we need to obligate about $1.2 million to avoid lapsing any funds and sending those back to the federal government. In Kentucky, we didn't have any cost increase funds available this quarter, but we will have those funds available next quarter. So in the next few weeks, I'll be sending out an email to all Kentucky project sponsors about being able to submit cost increase applications in the next month or so. And then, of course, more than likely, we'll have to get a project working group together for that as well. We did have a few proposed changes, and these are really things that, projects that we thought were going to be obligated at the end of fiscal year 18 that didn't end up making it at the last minute. So we've got three. One is the J-Town miscellaneous sidewalks and ADA ramps projects. That's TAP funded with both KIPTA dedicated and state TAP funds, I believe. And Cooper Chapel Road Phase 3, as well as the I-65 Brooks Street ramp. So my request to you today is to recommend TPC approve the 3 phase shifts in Kentucky.
Comments, questions before motions? Or do we have a motion to approve as presented?
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thanks. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Item number 7, 2025.
We're postponing that. to a
Yeah,
later date.
Transportation Improvement Program is postponed to a later date. Item number 8, group project categories. Staff will present proposal for group project categorization, evaluation and inclusion, and materials have been included in the meeting invite. With that, David,
Thank you very much.
thanks.
We have a couple of ideas that we want to work with you about. Staff's been working over a year on trying to figure out how we can, again, help us help you with this transportation planning thing that we do. Trying to figure out how to best deal with those smaller projects that may come down the pipeline. So we're calling them group projects. It's nothing new to what we do. This what we're proposing. Just kind of looks different and may smell a little different, but still the same thing. What we refer to them right now as our various projects. What we're proposing is we just kind of change the way they look and smell a little bit, and so it makes more sense in the bigger picture. So we're still doing this various concept. We're going to call it groups, and then we're going to kind of put a little structure to it, so that it makes sense for everybody. Us, the planning staff, you, the technical committee, and project sponsors, the policy committee, and of course the public, so that we all kind of are singing the same thing. Right now, so we have various, and we're going to try to go to group. If you were to try to look at it in a way that makes sense, various, there are tons of them. And they have different shapes and sizes and colors and looks. Some of them are the same thing and they overlap. And they just keep coming. Keep getting more and more various projects proposed to be included in the EMTP and into the TIP. To the point where it becomes almost unwieldy, trying to make sense of a lot of different things, and some of them are the same. How many did we say we had? Over 100 at one point? Yeah, over 120 various projects, all attempting to achieve very similar things. Okay, that's hard for anybody to understand. It's hard for the public to understand. It's hard for us to understand. It's hard for you to understand. So what we're proposing is that let's take this mishmash of various projects that everybody keeps throwing to see if it will stick, to see if it will work, and make more sense out of it so that we can all benefit from it. So we want to go to this group concept idea. We're looking at about 8 different groups. Here's the primary thing we want to think about, though. This group concept right now is only going to focus on new projects that are being introduced to the TIP. New projects, programs, and studies. So the admin mod process that you're all familiar with projects that are currently in the TIP, will continue. This whole group thing is about new projects being introduced to the TIP. Shared expectations are very important. We discovered that with the project management process. We sort of took a process that was nebulous and tried to make sense of it and share it with everybody, and it seems to be working a little bit better for the whole region. So we're going to take that same model and say, okay, let's have shared expectations between the TPC, the planning partners, all of us, and the public, so that we all understand going in what we can expect coming out. So let's work together on that. Project and program management. handling all these various categories is hard. It's confusing, it's conflicting, and it can lead to a lack of efficiency on how well we carry out the projects or the TIP and the projects that are located in them. So this is going to help that. Seamless accountability. This is a very important one because we are being held accountable. We being the staff, the TTCC, the TPC, to performance-based transportation planning. There are numbers out there that are measuring how well we are doing. And so we need to make sure that we're taking every opportunity to provide good numbers to that system. And this is going to help us do that. This is a very important one. That one and the shared expectations are really important ones to this process. Though it looks different and smells different, it's really not that much different. There aren't any real changes that are being suggested on how we amend the MDP or TIP. That's not going to change. How we do an admin mod of existing projects, that's not going to change. All we're talking about is how we account for the new projects that are being looked at and considered for the MDP and the TIP. This does a better job, we think, of adhering to the federal guidelines and intent of doing admin mods. So that's one thing, and we're going to go over all this in more detail in a second. We have poured over the data, looking at projects, looking at costs, looking at schedules, trying to make sure we have covered every T and dotted every I, and the data that we have come up with supports these funding thresholds that we've talked about. They're in this proposal. It also supports the 8 categories that we've identified. And lastly, this we think advances the idea of good planning practices and also has support from the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration as a way for us to do a better job with our planning practices. So those are the primary things that as we go forward from this point that we're going to make sure you try to think about and consider. Because here are the 8 group categories that we're going to be using going forward. They're the same for the MTP and they're the same for the TIP. So there's seamless interaction between what we want to see in the MTP and how we want the MTP to address these issues and how well the TIP carries out what has been identified in the MTP. So they're the exact same thing. No confusion. It's pretty simple. Okay, in your packet, under agenda item 8, you're going to find the proposal. Does everyone have an agenda? Packet, and has everyone found that proposal? It's called Group Project Categories for the MTP and the TIP. I thought about putting this into the PowerPoint, but decided it might be better if we just kind of walk through these individually. We're going to talk about the examples of a group as a group project category and the criteria. Now, how this will work. This will work if you submit a project for consideration into the MTP. We are going to suggest that through this group project, you hold on to that. Through this group project process, you hold on to your proposed MTP submission if it's a project that meets the criteria of one of these 8 categories. And here's why. It's because once the TIP has funds available to it, you can then immediately administratively modify that project into the TIP. Because we want to make sure that we're both advancing projects. That's very important, but it's also very important that the public is aware of the projects that are being advanced if they cross a certain threshold, if they have a certain impact on their expectations in terms of what we're doing. So we're trying to cover 2 areas: advancing those projects and making sure that the public is comfortable with the projects that are being advanced. So this process is going to help us to do that. So if you have a project that meets the criteria for the MTP, we're going to say hold on to that just a little bit longer until we're ready to add in mind to the TIP. We think that this group project category approach is going to allow you to do it almost immediately. within the 30-day thing, right? So that's how it affects the MTP. Now, when we get to the Transportation Improvement Program, what are we looking at? We have an administrative modification process that we follow right now. So Brian comes to us and says, I have a sidewalk that I want to add on Main Street between Maple and Oak. And that sidewalk project is going to cost me $450,000. We'll say, okay, Brian, bring that project in, submit it to the process that Nick and Adam and Amanda have for the admin mod, and we'll get that thing rolling for you. That's the way it would work with these 8 different categories for the tip. Because we will have established group categories that are mirrors of one another in the MTP and in the tip. That gives us that vehicle to do that. If you look at this in the document, you might have seen that the group categories funding threshold is $1 million. So if you have something open, if Brian comes to me and says, I have that same sidewalk project, it's 1.2 million. We're going to say, Brian, that particular sidewalk project may need to go through a full amendment process so the public is given the opportunity to understand how their funds, the public's money, is being used to make improvements to transportation. But the kicker to that is most of the projects that have been administratively modified through the tip for bike and ped facilities have been below $1 million. So that's important to keep in mind as we go forward. That's some of the research we've been doing to see how well this will work. So, MTP and tip. That's the basic premise of how this is going to advance. Has everyone found the draft document that we have? Let's get started. If you have questions, raise them. Larry, me, other people on staff, we're going to help you answer them so that you feel more comfortable with this. It's new, but it's better. Starting with air quality improvements. Okay, so if you look in the document, you'll see that there are, at the top, says air quality improvements. And then there are examples of the types of projects that are known to, or have been considered as air quality type projects that that we would like to see go through this group category. And then there are just criteria. So you've got one bullet list that's examples. The second bullet list are the types of projects, or the criteria that will allow you to advance a project through this group project category. Take a quick look at that. Then let us know if you have any questions.
And those examples you can see on every one of these, it'll say, but not limited to. This is just a guide. If a project will fit the criteria below, even though it's not on that list, it still would be eligible.
Right. Okay, any questions about the air quality type improvement? As you can see, we have some very defined criteria relative to projects that are anticipated to contribute to improving air quality.
So do these lend itself like to a CMAQ application?
Yes.
Is that
Well, in Kentucky, after you make the application and it gets awarded by the state, then we would be able to admit and modify that very quickly.
That's what that section 108F refers to, the clean air, as the CMAQ type projects.
So as an example, I know that KYTC had a $1.8 million CMAQ project last year that we were awarded. That would not be able to be administratively modified. It would have to go through.
It would go through the full amendment process. That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Question regarding transit service improvements, and I do have a couple of comments on transit, but I wasn't sure. New transit service, should it go under this category, air quality improvements, or under transit improvements? And I don't see it anywhere listed.
New service?
Yes.
New service
Like operating costs.
Net new service?
Yes.
That could go under either the air quality or the transit.
Yeah, well, can you place it wherever you find appropriate? But I would like to see new transit service improvements listed either under air quality or transit improvements. As long as it's in there, either way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just kind of following on that question, it's not specific to the air quality, but for projects that could fall like a transit or a bike ped in one or the other, is there any reason why you would put them in one or the other, or is it just kind of, what does it fit best in? Like, and is there any cap in the number of projects in a group?
It's sort of what it fits best in. One of the things we're trying to do with these 8 categories is also identify where are the things that we think that you need to really focus your attention. Mm-hmm. So it's a dual purpose, but a bike and ped facility could technically fit under either one.
Mm-hmm.
How does it happen today? You got Brian Sidewalk, a new project brings to you. It's got to be in the plan before it can be in the TIP anyway.
There has to be one of the many various sidewalk improvement categories that might work for Brian. It might not. Let's take that guessing game out of it. Because if Brian has various sidewalk improvement project for Clark County, then he could use that. But if he doesn't, then he can't administratively modify.
So we're going to go through the amendment anyway.
Yeah, that's what the
Underneath the current.
Right.
That it's same for the $1.2 million
That's correct.
project.
Okay.
David, in the MTP?
Yes, sir.
In a particular year in the MTP, would there be an amount associated with this that these projects would?
No, what we're going to do is similar to what we do with projects. We're going to look at an average amount that's been allocated over a 4 or 5 year period for those projects that have been grouped into that category, and then use that just like we do with projects to extrapolate the total cost that might be programmed for planning purposes only, and for bike and ped facilities over the life of the plan. There is no subdivision of funding allocation in the MTP. You have a $24
And what about in the TIP?
TIP is by year, yes. So we would assume that if Brian is bringing his sidewalk project to the table to administratively modify, he would use he would also bring the money with it. In other words, he would go to Nick and say, Nick, is there enough money for me to administratively modify my sidewalk project to the TIP? And Nick might say, yep, we have STP funds that we could use. So then we would administratively modify Brian's sidewalk project into the TIP.
So
if the funds are available, Nick gives the thumbs up.
So a working group for TTCC and TTC could allocate in the TIP in a particular year $1 million for the sidewalk group or whatever that's called, if they choose to, or a project that gets TAP funding could use that category, and then it's bringing funds that are outside of that solo fund. Is that?
I was just going to clarify that these groups, they don't bring any money with them.
Right.
This is just the mechanism in which the federal government says if you make it clear these group project categories that a bike ped project under a certain threshold can be administratively modified within that month. That's how it's going to happen. This isn't new money or anything of that nature.
So it's really just to account for TAP awards and
It's really how the mechanism, how we get those projects and those funds into the TIP. So with an administrative modification, if it's eligible for that, we can do that within 30 days and make that eligible, and you can get your funds and obligate them within those 30 days. If not, then it has to go through one of our either exempt or non-air quality impacted projects or non-exempt amendment, and that can take between 2 and 3 months.
It serves as
really
a
the time it takes. What we're talking about is how we get projects into the TIP and the time it takes them to occur.
So if an LPA had a sidewalk project that was a priority that they wanted to try to fund with SLO funds, this really isn't addressing that. That's kind of a different.
No, it's not a placeholder. It's not dedicated funds to that particular group.
Okay.
Right now, they do have
In the
dollars
TIP.
associated
In the TIP they
right,
do.
for the TIP to various but sometimes those various funds are spent, sometimes they're not. So we're trying to make sure that moves a little bit better so that there aren't any monies being held for projects that may or may not come forward.
Right now, the barrier, it's unlimited as far as what a project could be. But under this group, of the Fed saying we have to cap it then?
No, what we're saying is, in the various, it's not unlimited. Because in the various, you have dollar amounts that have been associated with each of those various categories. It says that we anticipate having this much money available for us in a given year to advance a sidewalk project. What we're saying is right now that may actually work against us a little bit because we want to make sure that we can introduce, that we can not hold funds that aren't going to be spent, not hold them or prevent them from being used elsewhere.
David, I gotta just jump in and make sure that Matt hears this. So here is where it would impact him. Before, now, today, if you've got a new CMAQ project in your area, it was $1,001,001, it would be administratively qualified in.
It would be.
Yes. After this, that would be an amendment.
Right.
KYTC brings the new project and we bring the money. We've always been able to add certain projects in. The federal regulations allow group projects so that they can be administrative, so they can be added by administrative bond. There have not been limits on those.
So
There
is
will
it,
be now. That is, and the federal regulations do not put limits. I want to be clear about the difference between the wonderful organizational work that this is doing, but then that very second, very different, very new piece of proposed limits. I'm sorry, Tanya. I get that right.
Any more questions about air quality before we move on to the next project?
Also, I just wanted to maybe a little bit of a clarification. In the past, we've been able to do group projects, and all group projects are considered a form of administrative modification, but not all administrative modifications are group projects.
That's correct.
Yes.
Correct. So we're taking a special group of projects with a thought of a group project being something that could be implemented or expedited fairly quickly from a procedure approach to now really kind of defining that, putting a box around that a little bit more and saying, here's what defines specifically a group project. Anything that is not in that category has to go through an even more extensive approach in a longer period of time to make that happen.
No, that's not quite.
No, the other side of that is without this structure, the MPO can arbitrarily say, you've got a $500 project. It is going to have some kind of odd impact. We think you should amend it.
You can still do that, even with the new policy.
And certain types of projects, yes. But what this does, it allows the structure where if you have a project that fits this criteria, there's not anything that says we can stop it. It goes through the process. It meets the criteria, so it is by default administratively modifiable, where we don't have that today. The MPO can at any point say that project, because we don't have guidelines in black and white, we can say that project needs to be amended,
So that
regardless of the project.
Sorry. So that I'm hearing you correctly. So if we list those particular project types, knowing what that is, and we've got a few subcategories, if you will, underneath your categories listed right now that you propose, knowing those requirements, when we submit, we are all under the impression that that will go through. It doesn't need to go through approval through any particular group or committee, TTC or TPC. I know you give them informative information, but we aren't held up on a project. At that point, when we get some email or something back from you guys saying that's good, then we can proceed forward with that project. Is that correct?
What's the special circumstance of that?
Being it, if it fits this category, this defined box that we're creating right now for this group project. My point is trying to make sure that we all understand exactly what this means. And so for the process is what we're trying to define here. We're saying that if it's one of those subcategories that we have listed, that you proposed, for example, maybe we're all discussing modifying some of those lists a little bit to clarify. If it does in fact meet that, then all we need to receive from you guys is an email that basically says, yes, you're good to go. In essence, this meets this requirement of a group project so that we, as an entity, can move forward with proceeding with that project. Is that correct?
I think generally, yes. I think maybe the nuance there might be the time it takes, like how much of an emergency are we talking about sometimes? I think that's what's come up often is, are you talking about the time frame, like 30 days versus 1 day?
Well, that's right. So we're talking, for example, safety projects, which if we as a cabinet have defined a project, we found that there's data there that indicates there's an issue. And we want to immediately address that issue. And we have a way in which to do it, a funding mechanism, and we've already got that lined up. And we say, we want to do this group project, I don't know, high friction service being one example. We'd like to go ahead and implement that. We submit that to you guys with all your requirements to do that. Knowing that it's one of those listed items, and you give us an email back and say, yes, we're good to go, we can then proceed with implementing that project. I know we have to get it into the STIP, and it's through the group categories that we do all this, so in a way, it's already in the TIP and the STIP because it's in a group category. Does that make
I think
sense?
generally speaking, if there's an emergency and we need to expedite it versus giving us the 30 days and allowing TPC the opportunity to see that, I know they don't get to approve it. I think as an NPO staff, we prefer that whether they're administrative modifications or amendments, that TPC actually sees them. I think if it's an emergency and needs to be done that same day, I think we've done that in the past and we will continue to do that.
And most of those are the safety, like I said, safety type
Right.
projects are things that we want to address on a quicker basis than to wait for the procedure formality to make that happen. I'm just trying to clarify between a group project and a normal admin mod. A normal admin mod would be submit this stuff to you and wait till we go through through that process to give it out. Otherwise, we're doing two things that are the same anyway.
Okay, if it qualifies as a group, if it can qualify as a group project, it doesn't, like I said, this list is not an exhaustive list.
Right.
If it meets the criteria, it is eligible to be administratively modified. Okay? Just because you say we have a project that fits that doesn't automatically say you've got an administrative modification. It makes it eligible for the process. We still have to go through the process. You will wait no longer than 30 days to get that done. Because what we like to do is have the TPC see those administrative modifications. Even though we're making them immediate, we want them to see them before we send it to you to put in the STIP. And that's not going to change. That's what we do today. It's a preference. I know we don't do it, and I know for whatever reason you have projects that come up, you need them the next day. What we're trying to do is prevent that from happening in the future. Because I know, you know, most people know that that project didn't come up today and that you're going to do it tomorrow. That project came up a while ago. So even if it's an administrative modification and you're going to a letting in a month, you could let us know 30 days in advance. You could let us know 2 weeks in advance so we can get it in the mailing to the TPC.
And I see what you're saying, but not all projects follow that process.
Why not?
So we have some projects, and we do have things where we have what we call statewide contracts, where we have people already, the letting's already happened. The process is already in place. We already have a contractor that does this type of work. Now we find out that, yes, in fact, this is an issue, and we want to address it as quickly as possible from a safety standpoint for the safety of others. But to wait for 30 days might be a significant issue. It might not be. But I feel like safety is a big scenario.
Safety is a huge scenario.
The process should affect that in a negative way potentially. That's the concern I have, and I don't always know when these projects come out.
Well, one thing that
I'm sitting on them for 30 days to give them to you or anything. As soon as I find out, I send them.
Well, see, we do have an issue there too, and I really liked what John Moore said on the phone call the other day. We're trying to bring planning back to Kentucky. Well, we certainly are trying to bring it back to Louisville, and that includes knowing in advance when a project is going to go to a letting, and you always know a month before a letting. You have to. It's the process. I know, and it's a disconnect within the agencies, and it's not just KYTC. It's other agencies as well. That the people who are working through our process aren't the ones that are always aware of all the projects, and you have to deal with it at the last minute from your side, and then we'll have to deal with it at the last hour on our side. So we want to try to get away from that.
Right, and a lot of this stuff doesn't happen because of the constraint of the TIP having to be physically constrained.
Mm-hmm.
Some things don't happen until the money actually lines up for it to actually take place, and it's like you're already 2 days behind as soon as you know the money's there, right? And you have to have it all lined up. So it is a little bit of a nuance here. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to create a scenario that impedes the process.
We're not.
In a way, we'd like to be able, I totally agree with what you're doing, and I think it's a great way to do it, and you need to do the categories, and we need to clarify these things. But maybe a little bit more of an extensive list. I know I have a lot of people here at KYTC that are very interested in what we're doing, and then looking at it not just what is KIPTA doing, but how is that going to affect us? What can we do better? You know, you have some really great examples. Don't get me wrong. But the point being, I've got a lot of people that are now interested in this and they like this idea. They want to look at the list. And
Well, that's why you have to look at the criteria. That's why you have to look at the criteria rather than the list. Because every single project that we can come up with is not going to be on this list.
Correct.
But if you look at the
It
criteria,
helps to know. So if I'm sending something to Nick or I'm sending something to Amanda, I know high friction service is on that list. We should feel good about high friction service.
we could never,
We
we could never put anything on the, everything on
In
the list.
developing these categories, we work backwards from, I think there's like some reg, CFR 126, blah, 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 that has about 100 and something project types. We made sure that all of our project types include every specific type of project that's listed in that project eligible for group projects. So we've spent a lot of time figuring out if there's any loopholes, if there's any projects that wouldn't fit that we've missed, and I can't think of any. If there are, we'd be willing to
Well, that
make
was
an
my
adjustment.
point. You know, I was kind of proposing the idea of maybe tabling some of this discussion because I have other groups that are highly interested in these pieces of the puzzle and wanting to look at that further because they're the experts in these various areas. I just kind of help direct or be the liaison between us and you all back and forth. So they're giving me feedback. I've gotten some feedback. I'd like to get a little more feedback so that we can kind of clarify because there are a few that have already found a few things that they'd like to put in. For example, technology. Things change. The way we do things change. And so some of this stuff here, maybe there's another way in the high friction service being one of those applications. That's something we use more readily.
Again, we are never going to have a full list of every single project that might be eligible. And to start adding those to this process.
Not completely extensive, but the ones that we use the vast majority of the time. It's kind of the way I've put it out there for the groups that are looking at this information.
And that's fine. And if they're not covered, specifically in the criteria, please let us know. But again, we cannot put an exhaustive list of every single project. But we really need to move forward with this because we're putting together a new MTP. And all of these things are going to be included as part of that new process, which is why we're bringing it to you today, is to move forward with it.
But basically, is it safe to say that really opens the door for smaller projects to move faster in the process and for us to implement and spend the money in accordance with federal guidelines rules, basically just move faster than we did in the past, but still go through the process presenting to TTCC and TPC administrative amendment and just go ahead.
It cleans up a lot of the process that we have today. When we look at over 100 various projects in there, not everyone in this room is covered under those various categories. City of Shepherdsville, for instance, could not bring us a sidewalk and go under the current various categories because you don't have one. City of St. Matthews doesn't have one. So we're taking the project sponsor element away from this completely. And another thing that was guiding us to this group project concept where we have these particular categories is our performance management side. And the way that it's going to in the future, because that's where we are now, our performance management is the way we do planning. It's going to allow us to capture the impact of that entire group of that particular type of project a lot easier than we ever did before.
Larry, are you saying you would have added those by amendment, those two examples you just gave, because there wasn't a various category for that agency?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
So now all bike and ped projects that meet these criteria can advance. Yeah, Jim.
Basic KIPTA bylaws question. Does that decision for an administrative amendment have to come to the TTCC as a recommendation of TPC, or can it go directly to TPC?
It goes directly to TPC.
So tomorrow, one of these comes in, and you've missed this meeting. It doesn't mean you can't get on the agenda for the TPC. Second question, can the TPC have specially called meetings? I'm just saying, because if that's a concern, that all of a sudden you've got one that can't be done quickly enough, I mean, couldn't the TPC be called to a special meeting with one agenda item to approve an administrative amendment?
Well, they don't approve administrative modifications. We only take
just information.
We only take it's for information only.
Oh.
No,
it goes through the process automatically.
In any emergency, we did one over the holidays. We sent it out to TPC, just sent an email to all TPC members saying, here, this came in, this needed to be approved immediately as part of the
Well, that's what I'm
administrative.
getting at.
Yep.
is
So-
Procedurally, there's a way
There
of
is a way.
covering that concern that this new way of doing it, grouping them together, may have a glitch in it that's not fast enough. Well, there is a way.
We have done that in the past.
Yeah.
There are other MPLs across the country who actually have the policy committee approve administrative modifications before they move forward. We don't do that.
Well, we do. I mean.
We
it
advise
covers
the
agenda
committees.
items, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have to.
There's no approval.
So that eliminate, does that not eliminate the concern?
It could.
Raised about?
It certainly could.
That's just a policy then that kept taking that position. Since you say it doesn't really require any formal approval.
No formal
But
action.
you do hold it up till you get some recognition
We,
or
Some information is shared
Yep.
to policy.
just that they've seen it, I guess.
we try to hold it up. There are occasions where we can't, and we send out the email to the committee and
That's
advise
right,
everyone.
comfort
So,
level,
yeah.
I guess.
No, they have to be presented to you all, they're
Yep.
just information. So in one form, either at a meeting or via email, they do have to be presented to
Yep.
you all, or TPC, I should say.
See,
You're aware of
why
it.
couldn't you go ahead and approve it prior to it?
It
Go ahead
is,
and
it's
give them the
instantaneous.
notice. Go ahead and give the cabinet the notice that their project's been administratively approved, and then it's just a matter of fact information at the next TTC meeting that this is what was approved within this period of time.
Yes, and we've done that in the past. We'd like to not do it multiple times a month, I think is.
We think
the
it-
goal.
But in an
But
emergency.
things happen and we've done that.
You want multiple times a month. Issue the
Send out
approval,
emails.
then
Yeah,
the same
emails about
modification.
emergency administrative monitoring.
That's why we do it all at once, or try to do it all at once at the meeting for the month.
It just seems like it's not an emergency. If it's something that Kipton can do by right now, then as they come in, you approve it. And then at the next TPC meeting, here's just a list of all the stuff that was conducted.
Well, that's what this allows us to do. Currently, our guidelines are not in writing, and it's kind of nebulous on what staff thinks of administrative modification should be. This puts a fine point on it.
But I heard you still say you will hold up giving that notice until at least TPC's seen it.
Exactly.
So I still have to wait.
Well, TPC, because if it's an emergency, quote unquote emergency, we can send it by email. But the TPC still has to see it, and we post it on the website.
So there is a mechanism with regardless of whether we move forward with this or the old way, we're doing it, and it's not really any different
No,
today or
No.
under the policies. So does that cover this
It
concern?
does. I think they're trying to formalize things a little bit more, which I'm fine with that. It's just in the past, things have been able to move fairly quickly when needed. Okay, now if you're saying, well, we're not going to necessarily do that until we officially show it to the TPC, that kind of creates a hindrance. So my
that's
point
where we
is-
are now, though.
Yeah.
We used to not do that within the last year or so.
We've always shown it to the.
Mary Lou
we've-
always sent an
no.
email out.
She
We
did
will-
send an email out, but it didn't hold up us moving forward with the project. So I'm just trying to get this clearly defined, so you're saying, we're not gonna hold up a project, we're gonna shoot an email if we need to, let everyone know that this project's going through, but the project can still move forward. That's kind of my issue, is I just don't wanna hold up something that's considered important enough to.
That's no different than what it is today. We're not changing that at all.
Okay.
What we'd like to do, and what we've always liked to do, is have it in print before the TPC meeting for the month and send it out in the packet. So then it goes out to the public. It's available on the website. It's available to all the members for review prior to that. But we have on many occasions, as you well know, sent out an email to all the TPC members saying, we're advising you that this project has been administratively modified. So that process isn't changing. They still have to have advice.
I think we're good with that for now. You know, that can be a thing. If there's more details that we need to work out, we can work those out. But I don't think that's a big issue. I think our bigger concern actually had to do with the hard and fast cost thresholds, because that's something that doesn't exist under the current process. It is more at the staff's discretion. What qualifies for an administrative modification versus an amendment? So currently that's been kind of a gray area, and that's kind of problematic. So I kind of appreciate the attempt to quantify that and set thresholds for, you know, what is too big of a project to be an administrative modification, what has to go through the amendment process. But at the same time, you know, just speaking for the cabinet, I know there's some concern about about losing that flexibility. You know, what happens if we have primarily we're concerned about the bridge and pavement rehab category because those projects can be quite expensive and they can also come up quickly. So, for example, if we have a bridge inspection that uncovers a problem and it turns out we need $12 million worth of repairs to a bridge, you know, it looks like now there's no discretion. You know, in the past, the MPO staff could have said, well, it's bridge repairs. We're not really changing the transportation system. We're just maintaining the system, and it's expensive, but it's important to be able to go ahead and do it, and not have a 3-month to a year, depending on who you ask, delay for an amendment to go through. So I think that's more of a concern for us than what we were talking about previously.
Could I suggest something there?
Sure, go ahead.
Some folks may need to sort of catch up with you on that. So we might want to take a look at what Thomas is referring to is there are the eight categories, and we're not going to worry about the PowerPoint anymore. It's gone. I can sit here and click for you. Each of these, there are the 8 categories of each one of these. Kind of glance through them quickly, if you don't mind. You'll notice that there's, again, the criteria, and each of the criteria has a dollar amount associated with it, or a threshold that we think is relative and important. We already kind of touched on that. That threshold was identified by looking at prior year's administrative modifications and then rounding up. 3 years. So then we round it up so that we make sure to cover every administrative modification that's come through this agency over the last 3 years. So, for instance, with the bike and ped improvement route category, we're suggesting a threshold of $1 million. The most expensive one we saw in the last 3 years for bike and ped was around 1.3. What was the average we had?
The average bike and ped was $403,000.
$403,000. We're proposing $1 million. The roadway and bridge preservation rehab, the one that Thomas is talking about right now, we have a limit of $10 million. And then the roadway operational improvements is another $1 million. The safety improvements is $1 million. As you're flipping through, transit improvements $1 million. Enhancements $1 million, and then studies $1 million. So everything's $1 million except for the pavement rehab, pavement and bridge rehab, which is $10 million. And again, this is all based upon our looking over the averages of an average out the last 3 years to come up with a reasonable dollar amount so that you can continue to advance your projects, which are critical to us. But we can also maintain our responsibility to you and the TPC and the public to make sure you guys are aware of how your bigger ticket items are being funded and where those funds are coming from and so forth and so on. So that gets us back to Thomas's point. So I want to make sure everyone was aware that we are talking about funding thresholds, that if your project was over that threshold, we're going to suggest that goes through the full amendment process, which could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending upon, well, actually just 3 months. If it's
3 months for any of these.
Any of these, yeah. So go ahead, Thomas.
Sorry. Sorry for jumping ahead a little bit. When we haven't even been through all of the categories, but we've been looking at these over the last month, and I mean, quite honestly, it does seem very reasonable for the most part. I think the cost, the thresholds that you've come up with, I mean, I don't see them as being unreasonable at all. I guess it's just from our perspective, we worry about the what if scenario. You know, what if we have one of those? And again, a lot of these project categories, they can be planned for pretty far in advance. Although, you know, some stuff that goes through our dedicated or through our non-dedicated statewide funding cycles, like CMAC and the statewide Transportation Alternatives Program, you know, those can be. Those projects can come up, but again, I think it's unlikely that anything would go above those thresholds for the most part. Although Tom mentioned a $1.8 million CMAC project, so they do come up. So, you know, you'd be looking at a few months delay. I mean,
I think from a local government perspective, you might consider that one of the big concerns local governments have is waiting on an agreement to get started with work. This could add 3 to 6 months to that delay. If your project was bigger than $1 million and otherwise fit a category. So it's something to consider.
Where does the 3 to 6 months come from?
Or it'd be 3 months. If you were above a threshold, and you have what's called an exempt project, we would have to take that through an exempt amendment, which is about 3 months. We have to go through a public involvement process. We have to make sure our committees are aware of the comments they would receive, and then our committee has to take formal action to approve that amendment. That's about a 3-month turnaround time.
And it's created by that $1 million threshold.
No, that has always.
Yeah.
So that's no different.
That's no different. That's correct.
The thing is, I mean, we tried to look at it when we went back and looked at this historic data, what a typical project would be. The thresholds were set for anything that would be atypical. Because if it's more than that, then something's different. Something is different than the run-of-the-mill project. And is that something different? It's more impactful to the community. It's a bigger project. It's doing something that the others didn't do when it crosses that threshold. And it should be looked at a little harder, which means it should, from our perspective anyway, be an amendment rather than just an administrative modification sliding it through.
Amanda, did you have more comments?
I didn't understand the response. I didn't agree with the response to Jim's question.
Because it would be different.
I think the
If it's a
question is,
$1.1 million project, you're going to have a different mechanism and time frame to go through than if it was an amend mod, it went through a month. If it's going to be 3 months.
Yeah, let me try.
Right.
So, for example, you get a TAP award for $1,001. Today, that would be approved. With everything in this policy except for the threshold, that is administrative mod. With the thresholds, that is an amendment at $1,001. KYTC loves the categorization. We love the definition. It's going to save us time and energy. It's apparently even going to add some things that can be group projects. Didn't realize that. We are concerned about the thresholds. Some more than others.
So the staff is recommending a threshold. Couldn't we just modify that threshold? If we're hung up on $1 million,
What is a reasonable threshold?
That's the thing. Where's the line?
We're hung up on $1 million, and we keep using 1.2 and 1.1, and the example of Brian Friday was always just over $1 million. So if we said $1.5 million, that's a big deal.
Then our example will become, what if it's 1.6 million?
Exactly.
Well,
it keeps
but
going.
your average was, I mean, your high was 1 point.
The highest by Fed was 1.3 million. The average was 400.
But the average is 400.
The average is 400, right? But that's only for those projects. So
You'll find the same.
If we're hung up on a threshold, let's just move the target a little bit.
You'll find the same though with every category. Is that we are way below the average. And the point that Larry's trying to make is important is that administrative modifications are not for exciting projects. There are for the run-of-the-mill type project that's going to come down the pipeline. If it's anything more than the run-of-the-mill, then the public should have that opportunity, and the policy committee should have that opportunity to decide whether or not that's a good expenditure of public funds.
I guess that's for us and TPC to decide what is that limit. That's part of the conversation we're having now. I don't know if we want to have further discussion and maybe table that little piece of it, approve other parts, and hold on the threshold part and kind of have further discussion about it. I would suggest you look at your projects and look at what you're foreseeing here in the near future. Here's the thing about setting threshold. We know inflation occurs. The price of these projects are going to keep going up. So we're going to have to keep adjusting this threshold. And what percentage of our projects is acceptable to be within the threshold or outside the threshold? I mean, that's something you have to look at to see.
Although I agree with not rushing something, staff is asking us to consider taking action today because Larry said that we're beginning this.
It's going to be a mechanism we use in the new MTP and the new TIP.
And so delaying it is contrary to that recommendation by staff. So.
If we find out 3 to 6 months from now, things need to be tweaked, the policy committee can come back and say, let's tweak this. But let's start with something that has some support and research behind it.
How often do you do amendments then?
Pardon me?
How often do you do amendments?
The TIP?
2 to 3 times a year. Well, mostly policies.
Is it policy driven, it's set to do it once a year, twice a year?
No.
Just last year.
We don't have,
We did 3 in 2018.
yeah, we've done 3, we've done 4 in the past.
And you've done
Just
one.
depends on the circumstances.
Done 1. Yeah, just done 1.
And we've done 1.
And then, in case people have.
It's driven by if NDOT comes up with a long list of projects and KYTC's 6-year plan's approved, at the same time, we might have 2 or 3 amendments in the same year. Just depends on the necessity.
So it's the demand, I guess, so
Yeah.
addressing their concern, if they had that 1.2 request and they're over the threshold, generally you're saying they take 3 months, because you may not just do it for one project, you may wait till some more come in, and then, almost like our MTP project where we do our quarterly meetings, is kind of what I'm hearing. Because at the end of the minute, they've been somewhat not as often, but they're triggered more by the potential projects being hit.
Well, they haven't been
Number.
they haven't been necessary to be as often because of the way the projects are coming to us.
Is there some sort of clause or that can be added for emergency situations that where these thresholds are the normal projects, and then when you have an emergency situation like you know, where a bridge has been found that they need to do something quickly?
Emergency situations are completely out of this process altogether.
Okay, so that's why
If it's an emergency for bridges closed, the Sherman Minton Bridge closure, for instance, was an emergency.
Yeah.
And we just step aside and let the agencies take care of that. They let us know how much they spent, and we put it in the plan.
So let me ask a question.
Emergencies don't count.
Yeah, my apologies. How critical it is to take actions on this item today
It's,
in terms of other timelines down the road?
to us, it's very critical to get an idea of where how we're going to move forward with the group projects.
Right. And I would like to make a comment aside of this particular item, how important it is to consider all aspects of the process. We frequently, at every meeting, approve process changes, amendments, new measures. This discussion shows how many different aspects of the process there is. Sometimes approving something, we don't really have full understanding what is going to happen down the road. And of course, there is no process that will cover exceptions. Criteria are very critical here, and I am in support of the project, but the things that you just brought up, I didn't consider because we all don't know that. So that's the reason I was asking how important do we need to take actions today, or would the members prefer to take a different route?
Is there the potential that we could make a motion to approve what we agreed to here today, with the exception of maybe table pieces of it for approval next month? Say, for example, the limits that we're talking about, the financial limits, and maybe tabling that list to whether we potentially expand that list or more clearly define some of the things that we've got people that are considering that. I mean, that's just a proposed idea. I don't know if that's what we want to do for sure, but
Right.
it would seem to allow you guys to continue to move forward with your MTP, which is a draft document. You're still working on it. It gives us a chance to clarify and get these things more clearly defined with the groups of people that are interested in their specialized in specific areas in question. I'm just throwing it out there as much.
I guess I'm still not quite sure where given the data that we found that supports the thresholds that we've identified, where there's this concern.
The threshold concern I have is you're looking at historical data, which is good. It's solid. I agree with that. But we have to look at projected data because this is what's going to be applied in the future to what we're doing. We also have to look at inflation and how is that going to factor in. We also, and I don't know if everybody's probably aware, so you have group projects. They're going to combine us all together and put us in a total cost. So that means each of us have to give them a cost of what you're projecting over the next 20 years for each of your group projects, because they have to come up with, or maybe you all come up with it, but we're looking at it from our perspective of how much our categories are going to cost. Because in your MTP, you had broken down, the years and the total cost for that for the next 20 years for your MTP, right?
We don't have to break down the cost for each of these categories.
No.
It will rise up.
You're just going to come up with a
Total.
total.
A total number, right? Yeah.
You know, each group, well, the agencies won't have to do that.
Okay, because I
If
felt
you're bringing
like
the
before
funds
we
to the
did
table,
that.
we'll definitely.
That's because the various categories were different agencies.
Right.
And everybody
so
had to
now
come
you're
up with a
gonna put
number.
them all together in one, but I thought that it had to be constrained. Is that not correct?
In the
Reasonable.
In the
Right, and
MTP,
reasonable
we're going to
constraints. So
identify
we have to look at it too to make sure that we're thinking of certain projects, what that cost would be for us, so that we know that.
in the MTP, we're going to identify what we think are reasonable expectations for funds that might be, for planning purposes only, that might be expended through the horizon year of the MTP. In this case, it would be 2040.
Right.
And that's, today, we're doing that with the year of expenditure, considerations, and everything else. And for planning purposes only, there's no obligation that these funds are going to be available in 2035. It's just we're saying that for our purposes of putting together a plan, we are going to forecast these funds to be available through the horizon year. And then we're going to go forward with that as, is our plan financially reasonable? And there's no reason why we should be concerned about the dollar amounts that are associated with these group categories relative to the MTP. That's going to be a staff-started process. We're going to talk to NDOT, we're going to talk to KRTC, we're going to talk to TAR.
It's expectation, not commitment.
That's critical. Yeah, this is for planning purposes only. That's in bold and underlined. It's not. There's no expectation or obligation that these funds will be available as we've defined.
Okay. From my end of it, I'm just trying to get my group to look at these pieces and see if it's reasonable, what our costs for the next 20 years are going to be, if that's a reasonable cost. So that's why I'm not able to turn around something yesterday and, there's some of the things I could, some couldn't, because they wanted to kind of get more in depth with that.
And maybe your group just
To make
needs
it
a
more
little
of a
bit more
sound
time.
number.
We are concerned about unnecessary delays to projects. So even to the point of not being able to spend money in this region because of this additional time. That is a very real concern for us.
It hasn't been an issue before with administrative modifications. We've been looking at the prior 3 years and haven't had a concern as to whether or not we are within a reasonable threshold for admin
I
mod.
understand. I think you try to do a good job with the amount, but if there is a very real possibility of us having $15 million to come in and spend on pavement rehab by the end of a fiscal year, that this would prevent us from being able to do it. Those risks outweigh for us any potential benefit. That's where we're at. It's not the end of the world, but that's our concern.
I think we have to find common ground here. It looks like you guys don't feel comfortable with moving forward in the process. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or on.
We've gone on record.
But
Open and honest. We feel good about it.
absolutely, and that's how it should be.
And I think we would rather. I like it enough that even with our concerns, I would rather see it go through like this than not go through. I think it'll be better overall. That's just me personally. And I think, I don't think that we'll have many issues with the thresholds. It's just we do worry about the what if scenarios.
We'll cut these $5 about 1 million, right? So
Yeah.
we'll bring it down.
If it doesn't work going forward, we have the opportunity to revisit the process.
I will say we would feel a lot more comfortable with it if there was an abbreviated, if there was an even shorter amendment process for these projects that fall into these categories. I don't know if that's possible or not, but if it could be done in 1 month, just so that the MPO does have approval.
We don't have that. That can't be done. Not because
3 months is the best we can do on an exempt project.
we have a public participation plan that requires us to take steps that we have to adhere to.
And yeah.
We have to get you materials in advance of the TPC meeting. We'd like to get TTCC involvement in approving that amendment. All those steps combined are easily 3 months.
If you award a TAP project, you won't have the agreement written in 3 months.
We can't write the agreement until we have the money. We can't get the money until you put it in the tip.
Yep.
So Amanda, I heard you use the word $15 million, and I'm thinking it's in the category of roadway bridge preservation and rehabilitation. So without picking an arbitrary number, if you had a $10 million cap, can we increase that? Would that relieve that particular issue? Again, in this, I hear everybody saying we like this idea, this is good, it's helpful.
I feel better if it's greater than 10, and I think they've already said it only needed to be 6, but sure. But
So
I don't like 10 and I don't like 20. It is arbitrary. But
it's not
helps a little.
Six is the highest one that we've had.
Well, again,
That's why we said 10.
But they're talking to other people in the cabinet.
Well, that's what we need. Again, it goes back to the idea of typical versus atypical. Where is that?
and I'm listening to the conversation, saying, great listening, thanks for looking at the historical information, here's what we see, and we would hate to hang up the project, because you potentially might see, or somebody's telling me there could be one that's even bigger than 6 million, 10 million.
Yeah,
What's the number?
The average is $926,000.
Well, my question to the staff is, why are we stuck? Why have you dug your heels on this number, as opposed to just saying, look, in order to advance this?
Because we set a very liberal number to begin with.
And it scares the cow.
Remember.
Based on what, though?
Last fall, we did this swap with KIPTA SLO money and SDP state dollars, because
The spending authority.
The area wasn't spending the money fast enough. So we 11th hour, I think our program management office made an agreement with KIPTA to swap that money.
Obligation authority, yes.
And wouldn't that require an administrative modification?
No.
To change from SDP state to SDP SLO?
Well,
Category.
Keep
That
in
would-
mind,
we were told not to.
But that wouldn't make any difference with this process.
Okay, well, that's okay.
We were told not to because we thought that it would be necessary.
That wouldn't be a major scope change to the project, and that would just be.
But it would be
funding.
larger. What if it was $19 million?
It's a change in funding on each particular project as you obligate the project.
what we're talking about today only affects brand new projects the very first time they enter our TIP. Once they're in the TIP, if you want to add $20 million to them,
Oh.
you can do it.
Administrative
Once they're in the
modification.
TIP, if you want to change the funding source,
What's that?
you can do it.
Yeah, I guess the other question we had was, a great example is the Dixie Highway do-over project, where that project needed to, because it was using Tiger money, it needed to go, move very quickly to a letting within a year. And it was gonna be an amended-in project, and there was a lot of discussion between our agency and Federal Highway about whether it was really a bus rapid transit project or an enhanced bus service project. And because Federal Highways determined that it was enhanced bus service rather than bus rapid transit, it was agreed that it could be administratively modified into the TIP. And that was a $30 million investment that if we had not been able, if we had a ceiling or a cap on the dollar amount, which was largely, it's $30 million or thereabouts, I don't remember the dollar, it's huge, but we would have lost out on this Tiger opportunity. And I think that's, funding is moving in that direction across the country, where we're applying for these huge grants, and we either get them or we don't. And that's how, I think we don't want to miss out on an opportunity like that. That's one of the greatest influxes of money that we got.
It is, but
Wouldn't have got if we didn't have flexibility to.
let's go back to the bringing planning back to Kentucky concept. That project should have been in the MTP prior to the award.
It could have been.
It wouldn't have been until the.
It would have been in the TIP.
No, it wouldn't have been in the
Because we don't
TIP.
have the money, so same amount of time. Right?
But it would go in, it would be a project in the MTP, and it would go into the TIP when you brought the money.
Still would-
Right. Kind of in
It would have to be
general.
amended to this.
Yeah. Many of the projects that we deal with are sometimes projects of opportunities. Let's say there is grant application out. Great, we have priority, we apply, we get the money. And that happens sometimes with sidewalk improvements, with road improvements. Agencies couple, we bring the money together in effort. So sometimes it's project of opportunity that we may or may not have in the plan on the time. We should, I agree. We should. But honestly, with grant applications is always, grant is there, let's do it. So we don't know if we didn't know a year ago if this project will be in.
Yeah, we anticipate, we actually have projects where we've had to just front state money to get started because we're waiting for an amendment process. And so, we'd be behind the 8 ball on certain stuff. We're working on an interchange in Oldham County where we're waiting on the amendment process, and we respect that. But we still need to get going because we're going to try to get a federal grant funding, some infra grant money. So, the state had to find some money somewhere else to, start developing that project while we're waiting on those amendment process. Otherwise, we wouldn't be positioned to apply for that, big grant of money. the policies are very good for Kentucky to win big grants these days, and the state recognizes that. I think several districts have been awarded big federal grants just in the last few months. We just don't want to miss out on that. I hate to think that, Amanda said it pretty good where she said, we don't want to get at the end of the year and the state DOT has $15 million sitting on their desk and they can't spend it in Louisville because of a technicality.
Well, if you look at it that way, our whole planning process is a technicality. There's a lot of rules.
Well, but I don't think the intent is to do anything but improve the transportation system. There are opportunities that everyone else across the country is taking advantage of, and we probably ought to try to do that too. And yeah, we need to get better at planning.
We should plan for them because then we can take, like the interchange we were talking about yesterday, the interchange 841 in the Renaissance Zone. If that had been in the MTP, you might have gotten your last grant.
Right.
So we need to all work together. Going back to the federal certification review, we are successful because we all work together. And to recognize all the things that we have to do individually and together to make this work is why we're here. So whatever we need to do moving forward to make it better, to make it easier where we can, because the whole thing is hard. I mean, the darn transportation planning process as set up by the Federal Highway Administration is hard. And we've got a lot of things that we need to do because of it.
A lot of administration, a lot of processes. And that shows, I mean, this discussion shows that we really are not always able to understand all aspects of the proposal process or anything in between.
And I guess it was something that Amanda said earlier is that there were 120 instances of modifications like this.
Various projects.
So that's a lot of potential for concern, in my opinion. If we've used this mechanism that many times, then that's not what you
No,
there's 120 group categories.
Various projects
being created over group projects.
Okay, but the number of modifications has got to be significant. I mean, we do it all.
Oh yeah.
You're doing administrative
Yep.
modification of roughly 30 right now.
3 years we did 270. New projects added to our tip through an administrative modification.
270.
In 3 years.
But my point is that to me is a real big indicator that it's a tool that's used regularly to bring money into the region, and we should be cautious about putting limits on our ability.
92% of those projects went through as administrative modifications, though. The only ones that didn't were really odd ones that we probably don't want to go into. Everything else, when you categorize it, and Amanda did a great job in looking at that, when you categorize it and get those average costs and look at the outliers, we're well below the threshold in all of the different categories.
Yeah, I guess I didn't hear I don't know enough about the data to know. I mean, why are we choosing an average? Why wouldn't we choose the maximum? I don't. We can crank that entire if there's a.
We looked at the average and then we went above that. We're very liberal in that, setting that threshold.
So we looked at the maximum. We did, maximum and averages and everything. The one that's really causing, I think, the most headache is this maintenance group category, our road and bridge rehabilitation. The maximum project in the last 3 years was $6.6 million. And so we took your kind of fears of inflation, cost of projects are going up. So we're not going to set it at 6.6. We're going to set it higher at 10, hoping to account for more expensive projects in the near future. Maybe this might be the kind of thing where in a few years we take a look at these thresholds and increase them based on the last 3 years of data.
I know KIP is trying to do the right thing. There's no question. They're trying to be cutting edge and get 10 more of those awards next year, 8 more. But I guess it would help us. At KYTC, we say, don't go looking for problems. We have enough. What's the problem? What happened on that $6 million rehab that this is necessary? who did we, what community group did we find inside of their project when we came in that would be worth the extra, in our opinion, 6 months to do this? That's what we're looking for. What is the problem that we are solving with these thresholds?
Right now, there is a lot of confusion and lack of shared expectation on how projects are going to advance. It's not the negative that we're trying to solve. It's the fact that we're just trying to make things go better than what we've been doing.
And no doubt the categories will do that.
And there is no 6-month period of time. I know you keep bringing up the 6 month. With these exempt projects, we cut that in half. We're looking at about 3 months. But it's not that we're trying to react to some community's complaint about a project going forward or things like that they didn't know about. Is that there is a general expectation on how we are to advance projects through the MTP and the TIP. We have a great tool available to us with this admin mod. It's gotten overused in a way that we had over 120 various projects in our TIP and MTP that we couldn't make sense of anymore, and that we were seeing not only children but grandchildren starting to show up in these documents. So the trail was going all over the place, and it needed to be stopped. And so this is a way that we think we can help you by helping us do a better job by making sure you understand what to expect when we have an admin mod or when you want to bring a project to the MTP. It's not perfect by any means.
Wonderful. There's no question.
If I could chime in, I think the reason why we really want to set thresholds is because about a year ago, NDOT came to us, submitted a PIF through our normal administrative modification process, and wanted to add the Sherman-Minton rehab project that was $48 million. They wanted to add that project to our TIF through an admin mod. And we knew that $48 million, that's a lot of money. This project's going to have a huge impact on the public. We should slow this down, put it through an amendment, and let the public see it. And that was pretty obvious, right? $48 million is a lot of money. But where does it become less obvious? So that's when we started to look at thresholds. Okay, obviously 48 million, should we back that down to 30, 20, 10, 6, 5, whatever? I think that's the reason why we really want to set thresholds, and so that we know, and you know as a project sponsor, our explicit rules on if your project costs more than this, we want to slow it down and give the public an opportunity to see it. If it costs less than this, then it can move through faster. So it's kind of up to you guys, TPC, to figure out where that line is.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I guess maybe I might have a little bit different philosophy on that, and not knowing specifically what they did to the bridge, but just saying that it was a very large bridge maintenance project that came up as a result of an inspection. Do we want to slow something like that down, even though it's expensive? If the money's coming from NDOT's statewide money, would it be better, and this is kind of the way that I look at it, and I think the cabinet looks at it, for that kind of thing, it's strictly for maintenance and rehab type projects. Is the public more interested in going ahead and when that problem is discovered, and the money is available, going ahead and getting something done versus waiting 6 months to a year? Well,
first of all, that wasn't an emergency. That's the project that's coming up. So they weren't in an emergency situation. The other side of it is administrative modifications go to the committee. They're in the packet, hopefully, that we get them in there beforehand, and they're posted on the website. An amendment goes through a different process. An amendment goes through a much more extensive public involvement process that would let the public know of the magnitude of this project, because it will be very impactful. It's going to be closing the bridge for months.
Okay. I guess it kind of comes down to a project-specific question, because if it truly was an emergency and it was a question of having the bridge shut down, then we'd probably want to go ahead and move forward with it.
Again, the emergency situation, we're out of that. We don't get involved with anything. If it's flood repair, a bridge goes out, whatever, that's an emergency situation. We don't get involved with that.
Who determines if it's an emergency?
Federal Highway Administration.
Okay.
Through staff, it's the state recommendation to the Federal Highway Administration.
Okay.
Then declared
a state of emergency for that.
So that's an actual declaration.
Yep.
Okay. Let me ask too, these projects, putting these categories into the MTP, if there's a project that falls into one of those categories, will it not have the opportunity to be listed in the MTP at all, or could it be listed?
If it's not amended into the MTP, if it goes in as a group project, it won't be in there as a project-specific line item.
Okay, so in that case, I mean, that sort of argues for relatively low thresholds, just because if you want the MTP to represent a comprehensive picture of what your transportation network is going to look like, do you want to, $1 million might be a pretty significant bike and pedestrian project, for example, so that's not going to be included in the MTP if it's below that threshold.
It'll just be an aggregate of all the bike and ped projects.
We are capturing the impact for performance is going to be both a combined MTP and TIP approach rather than just an MTP or a TIP. It's going to be both. So the impacts of the projects that are relatively small will still be captured in a more realistic fashion through this approach. We feel pretty good about it, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I just wondered, I know bike and pedestrian projects, if they're significant and they, provide an alternative to automobile travel, they probably should be shown in the MTP, I would think.
We have pedestrian projects that are over $1 million.
Yeah.
That will be in the MTP.
The Big Four Bridge, for instance, would be in there as a line item.
All right. So, in that sense, I can see having a relatively conservative threshold as being advantageous. But on the other hand, in the interest of moving projects, it seems like the higher threshold is better.
Well, we've moved most of the projects that were initially modified, moved over the last 3 years. This isn't going to stop, though. Most of the projects that went through weren't stopped by this. Would not have been stopped by this process.
Which is kind of why we looked at the average and rounded up. So,
I guess it might be helpful if we saw a list of the projects that would get caught in this process that got through before, and we could look at them and say, "Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense." Or,
well,
that's just a little more expensive sidewalk.
We sent that to you. So,
did you?
Yeah, there's just a handful, and they are really odd projects. They're not your typical projects that would stand out.
Again, an administrative modification, run-of-the-mill project.
So how should an agency, if we had a project that was sort of borderline, we were developing a project trying to estimate costs, and it was in one of these categories, we estimated that the cost was going to be $900,000, so we decided not to put it in the MTP. It wouldn't go in the MTP because it was below that. And then if we got into the development a little further and it turned out there was something unforeseen and the cost goes up to $1.1 million from $900,000, then we'd have to do an amendment, right?
Or an MTP. No, it would be,
well,
the original project would have already been in
yeah.
there at under $1 million, and then you would just
Okay, so we would have included it in the TIP for under.
Right, it would go under the group project, right?
Okay, and going above the $1 million with that administrative.
That would just be a typical administrative modification to increase the cost.
Okay, that's good.
Which is not saying we don't want the bait and switch thing where you put
Yeah.
one in for $45 and it costs $3 million. We don't want that.
Right.
The costs that we're talking about, these thresholds, are the total cost of the entire project at the time you add it to the TIP.
Okay.
If for some reason you get further along in the development of your project and the cost goes up, that's okay.
It might be worth a group knowing that no other MPO has this. Is that true in Kentucky?
Not that I know of.
And
Well, virtually all of the MPOs have group projects. They have them in the TIP, not the MTP. So, some of them have them in the MTP as well. But there's no cost thresholds. It's just based on the type of project. Because generally, for a project to be air quality exempt, it's generally not going to be a significant project, which is one reason that I'm not too concerned about the thresholds, really. We've belabored the point a lot, and we worry about the what-if scenarios, but generally speaking, I don't think it's going to be a problem in probably 99% of the cases. But no, the other MPOs haven't found it necessary to set thresholds.
So now they will.
We would prefer that you not talk to them about this.
Actually, turn off the camera.
Yeah.
So some MPOs are more particular about the project categories that they allow into the tips, but they don't have a threshold, a dollar threshold. They're just more restrictive on the types of projects. But there's different ways of looking at things.
Yeah, I mean, we're not alone in the country by doing it this way. Maybe in Kentucky, but.
And this might be a question I don't think that, has everyone kind of seen, like your table, what you went through and kind of how you came up with what you did and kind of looked at your projects and say, okay, if those projects based on these thresholds, this is how many were under and over it? Nobody,
You have.
That was sent to you,
Okay.
but no one else has had access.
I didn't know who else maybe. Okay, just wondered.
Okay, well, that has been really great discussion. I'm serious about that, really. I mean, we can learn from this process, what we opened the door for. I saw this process and this amendment as an opportunity to move smaller scale projects faster through the process, get them done, save the time, spend the money. Well, obviously, there are many different aspects that one agency or the other has. So either we need to decide, can we get through this item at this meeting? How critical it is to delay it? We look to your guidance from this point because there are concerns. How comfortable do we feel with moving this item forward?
Staff has already begun to use this as a guideline for some of the project applications that we've been seeing relative to the MTP. That's how much we think it's a good idea, but of course that can change. And we can modify our approach to the projects that we've received relative to the MTP. For staff, it's important that we advance on this.
Of course, yeah. So we can continue. I don't know what's the level of comfort for voting after hour and a half discussion. So, we can continue. So, or Larry?
It's. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to propose a motion, and if nobody likes it, just don't second it, and it'll die. Based on all the discussion I've heard and the concern that, especially from the Transportation Cabinet, what appears to be, in my mind, the roadway bridge preservation rehabilitation projects having too low of a threshold for potential projects that they may see coming in the future, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the group project categories as presented by staff and modify the threshold for the bridge and roadway preservation rehabilitation projects to $15 million.
A second.
Any discussion? Because we didn't get through all the categories here.
Well,
Sure.
My discussion of my motion would be that I didn't hear a lot of issues with all the other ones. We seem to be saying, okay, million. Matt and I are whispering each other's ears about, well, what about this project? When did that happen? Whatever. But we've heard from the staff that they've looked at the cost of these, and the average was much less than $1 million. So there is a buffer in everything, including the bridge and roadway preservation rehabilitation, but because there's a concern from the cabinet.
Right.
So I did not, in my motion, put any modifications to any of the other categories.
Correct. Thank you for clarification. I did have some minor comments on transit improvements projects where I would like to add some bullet points and make some suggestions, not necessarily related to the budget limits. So if we are going to move forward, I would like to relay those and then open for voting.
Well, you have a motion and a second, so you can deal with that.
Exactly.
Either ask for an amendment to that motion or something. I didn't realize that you were going to make comments, that you were asking for what are we going to do.
Well,
and here you go.
Great.
Well, there's an opportunity for discussion.
Did you ask for
She could ask
discussion?
you to modify your amendment.
No, I will ask.
No, Robert's rules is you make a motion to make an amendment and then you second that and vote on those amendments, and then you vote on the amended motion. I suppose I can withdraw that motion too, or second comes first.
Make an delete the threshold altogether for bridge and preservation.
I'm sorry?
We can make an amendment to delete the threshold altogether for bridge.
Well, that's
and-
not what the motion is. I'm trying to find a balance between what staff has diligently done to examine the kind of, and the issue. This whole public process is really important to consider. And as much as we'd like to keep a project, being able to fly through this process, the public has to have an involvement in it. And that's why you're proposing these amendments. Because there is a public process that we're bound to. So throwing it out completely sounds great, except the public's going to go, well, when do we get notified? So we have to pay attention to that.
And it's not just the public, it's also the MPO.
Yes.
The MPO needs to know where this money is being spent and how it's being spent.
Yes, I focused on the public issue. So,
And my question on the 15 million, if you ask for, did you ask for questions?
Any discussion is
Discussion,
right
okay.
now. We have a motion, we have a second, this is discussion, and then we will go to
Okay.
vote.
How about an amendment for 20?
My question is, what is that 15 or 20 based on?
Well, like I said, I'm doing future projections right now, talking to people, what are we planning in the next 20 years? And that's what this is going to apply to. So I'm trying to see beyond where we are now and what we've done.
if
It doesn't matter where
15 was based on, staff they rounded up, or they percentaged up to give that buffer.
From 6.
From 6. Well, what was that based on? 10 sounds like a good round number. How did you come up with 10?
Because the average was 4.
The average, the average for
6.4 something.
No, that was the high one.
was 926.
920, yeah.
Well, but again, we came up with 10 based on, same question, right?
It's-
Based on what?
Exactly. I mean,
It sounds like a nice round number. I've heard the cabinet saying, well,
think of the impact. Think of the impact of a $10 million pavement rehab project.
I made a motion. If anybody wants to offer amendments, you can vote on it.
Exactly.
We need to, because it was seconded, we need to take action.
Exactly.
If somebody wants, I think the proper procedure, Madam Chairman, is that if somebody wants to make a motion, they make a motion to amend the motion that was first and second. Then you vote, you get a second, and you vote on that. And then it goes into and modifies the original motion. Unless procedurally, to rescind the motion that's on the floor, the person that seconded it has to rescind it before I do. And I don't.
I would just like, are there any other points that need to be modified other than what you need?
Well,
Yeah,
we
and
need
so
to
that's
hear
why I'm asking.
from others if there are any other items to be modified.
Well,
But
you
I mean,
started
because,
talking
I mean-
about them after we.
Well, she mentioned it very early on,
Well-
that that's something that she wanted to. So if there's nothing else from the room, I would make the motion to amend the motion that's on the floor to include any points from TARP regarding transit. And then,
Except that you haven't heard.
well.
Yeah, exactly.
She outlined them earlier, some of the points that she was wanting to.
Okay, so someone.
I don't recall what they are now, but
Small.
I remember.
Small.
They're really small.
I think Tanya made it pretty clear that the cabinet's not done evaluating the impacts of these caps on our ability to deliver projects like safety and rehabilitation to the NPR area.
So you can vote against it if you care to, for the modification.
True.
Up to you.
I mean, at this point, I think that we need to move forward with this particular aspect that the staff has come up with. If there is some sort of presentation that the cabinet would like to do at a future meeting, then we can look at modifying those limits based on whatever data that you can present to the TTCC.
And Madam Chairman, get point of order, there's sort of a motion on the floor. You
There
can
is.
start having an open discussion about other things.
right.
You know,
Well,
I've got to leave. I've got a meeting at 3:30 back in office, so real soon here, he and I are getting up and going.
That's what.
That doesn't mean you should rush a decision, it just means we're.
that's
meeting.
exactly why.
No, we need to act on the motion.
Okay, we need to act on the motion.
Can I just clarify again, the motion on the floor that has been seconded is to amend the proposal with that from 10 million to 15 million, and that's the only change to what staff has brought to us that
And
you're.
then there's an amendment. Motion.
I made the motion to amend to include the comments that I either made earlier in the meeting about what she needs.
Transit service.
So there are two motions on the floor. One's been seconded. Okay.
Right. Before this
Following the
next
bouncing
one's
ball.
seconded, I think Aida needs to tell us what those items are.
I don't know if you have it.
Well, it looks like we have a main motion and then we have motion to amend, correct? So we have first and second, we had discussion. All in favor?
Wait, hang on. You have to have a second to his motion to begin. Matt was talking to me.
You just die for a lack.
So you have a motion to amend, you have to have a second to that motion.
Right, thank you, correct. Do we have a second on the motion to approve the entire process on condition that TARC includes some smaller amendments to the transit improvements? Second to the motion amendment.
What are those changes?
Those changes are under bullet points for transit improvements, second bullet point, onboard and to include and off-board transit amenities. Then include as one additional bullet point, technology and software improvements for communication, ADA accessibility or data collection. So to include under project criteria, additional information. So basically two amendments to the proposal from TARC. So I know that complicates everything, but those are. Thank you.
So now you have an amendment that you have to vote on. That then gets folded into the motion that's already on the floor.
Okay, so I guess we.
So in other words, the amendment could actually fail, while the other one goes forward, or it can be approved. So.
Do we vote on the amendment first?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All in favor of the amended motion?
Aye.
Against? Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, so now you have an amendment.
Correct.
Now the entire thing gets voted on. It could pass or fail, regardless of the amendment. So the motion that's now before everybody is to accept the recommendation of staff, modify the 10 to 15 million with the amendments to include TARC's comments.
Thank you for clarification. We did have second on this motion. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. I guess we couldn't make it more complicated today.
We could have.
Did you all vote for their extensions?
I didn't vote.
That was not at the
on
table.
the
It's a motion.
amendment to the.
To the amendment, so.
So you didn't vote yea or nay?
I would say nay on the whole thing at this
Well,
point because I don't
I was
think,
looking at you.
from my perspective, this has
Okay. So is the district vote no?
I think you guys are.
Okay.
Okay, well, we need to know that.
So what was your vote?
No.
It doesn't matter about the amendment part because the overall thing, I don't think the cabinet has assessed the impacts of the cost. So therefore, the district votes no. And I believe the central office voted also.
Okay, so there were two more votes.
Yes.
But the motion passes.
Thank you. Are we ready to move to the?
I think we are, unless anyone has to go home.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, everybody, for participating and taking us to the end of this item.
Hopefully, we're not going to lose a quorum. We're still good.
Let's try. Item number 9.
Can I ask you a quick question? Hate to lose this many people. Use yeah, you might want to use that.
We have one more quick item. Thank you.
We actually have two, but need action.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Item number 9, Transportation Technical Coordination Committee 2019 Officers Working Group to be formed. Larry,
Yes.
thank
What
you.
we need to do is we need to have 3 volunteers to serve as the nominating working group for officers for 2019. Do we have any volunteers? one. Anyone else? Need one more.
Well, I'll volunteer.
Okay. And what that group is going to do is put together a slate of nominees for chair and vice chair for next year. Oh, well, for this year. And they'll bring that back to us in February, and we'll have an election at that point. Thank you.
Action is requested here?
Yes,
Do
I
we
would
need a
like.
motion?
Yes, I would like for the group to approve that process and those three candidates for the working group.
Do we have a motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in
Was
favor?
that Nick? Did
I second.
you made okay.
All in favor? Against? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item number 10, other business, shift process.
Yes, this is not in your packet. It's something that came up basically yesterday. This one goes around. This is the documentation from last year's process that this group approved. After we went through the entire process, Transportation Cabinet had us document how we went through the shift process, sponsoring projects and boosting projects. More? Let me go around that. We have been advised that this process is starting immediately and that we are going to be asked by the end of February to sponsor projects. What we did last year, you can see the first group of bullet points there in the middle of the page is how we approached it last time. And we made this group and TPC as well, said, okay, first of all, the project is going to have to be in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We're going to run it through the Connecting Kentuckiana evaluation process, and then staff will put together the list of, and this time it was 51 last year, it's going to be 54 this year, where we have the ability to sponsor through the shift process 54 projects. So staff will come up with that list from our evaluation. We will provide that to the working group, or provide it to this group. And as we did last time, 2 years ago, and let the group approve, disapprove, add projects, subtract projects, whatever, to get us to that 54 that we submit for sponsorship. Subsequent to that, the Transportation Cabinet is going to take those projects and score them through their process, through the new improved shift process, and they will provide those numbers back to us. After that occurs, the district office and the MPO will both have the opportunity to select projects to boost, to further support with additional points. And in working with the district, hopefully we can come to terms on the ones that are most important, where they have the opportunity to boost projects as well. And it raises the score, which then goes into the statewide and regional evaluation process the cabinet uses. So what I'm asking for today is that the TTCC approve this preliminary process whereby we get to that list of 54 projects through that criteria. That they first of all have to be in the MTP, and then we're going to run them through the Connecting Kentuckiana application process for scoring.
Questions, comments on the presentations from Larry? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thanks. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item number 11, adjourn the meeting.
Motion.
Second.
Thank you. Second? Did I hear second?
No.
Second.
Thank you. So, all in favor? Thank you very much. We even had fun today.
Yeah. Thank you for all of your time
Appreciate
and attention.
Yeah, we're good.
Thank you.
Except some of the projects